Good afternoon.
Hello.
Good afternoon, Dr. Wilson.
Hello, Dr. Wilson.
Hello. Nice to see your faces again.
Yours too.
You look a bit more refreshed in the afternoon.
Who does?
Oh, everyone.
I bet you say that to all the Zoom conferences. Nothing to do with caffeine.
No, not at all. Not
Nothing
at all.
No, here. Yeah, nothing at all.
All right, I'm gonna share my screen real quick so folks know where we are, what meeting we're in, and then
Okay.
I'll pull it down before we get started.
Deputy Secretary, how are you?
Hello, everyone. I'm doing well today. Dan, I think the secretary talked to you. He's running a couple of minutes late, but he doesn't think he's on until about 1:15 anyway, given timing. So.
Oh, we were going to move him up just because we like him. So.
Then I'll just speak for him. All good. Hope everyone is well.
Oh yeah, we're doing great. I talked to the secretary yesterday and explained to him that this was not a time to try out his new jokes.
Good. Yeah, I briefed him too, and I used that. And interestingly, I'm learning enough. I said, "Hey, no jokes. Let's just stick to the facts."
Yeah. Yeah, one day get him to tell you where we were when we started making jokes, and it just did not go over so well.
Is this your number? Thursday. I know I can't do it.
Mr. President, I'm going to go ahead and stop screen share and make sure that we have everybody before we get started.
I do not see Dr. Duran on mine right now.
We are missing Dr. Duran and Miss Holton.
Exactly.
Yeah. Here she is.
Right.
Sorry about that.
All right.
Went to the wrong one first.
That happens. We'll wait for Francis.
I know, it's very confusing this month with all the extra meetings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll wait just a minute for Francisco and see if he pops in. Hope everybody had a decent shot at lunch.
Well, why have lunch when you can fit in another 2 meetings or so between 11 and 1?
Ah, life in the private sector, Dr. Wilson.
It's just life, I think.
All right, I see Dr. Duran here. I think we have all 9, right? I think so.
Yes, we are good to go.
Make sure, yep, I see 9 faces. Excellent. All right, well, we'll call the retreat, I guess, to order. It does seem sort of odd to call this a retreat since, you know, I guess in typical parlance, a retreat is when you get to go away somewhere and seclude yourself and, you know, contemplate and learn. And honestly, I'm in the same place I was this morning, so I do not feel like I have retreated, but so far, maybe a couple more cups of coffee will help my feeling of seclusion, but maybe not. But it's, you know, I guess a sign of the times we're living in that this is going to be what we use as the retreat. I will say again, as we've talked about many times, I really look forward to June when the board gets together again in person. I think we do our best work in person, and you know, just I miss all of you a great deal. You know, many of you understand my view of the board as you know, an institution with a role given to us by the Virginia Constitution. And that role is primary responsibility and authority for effectuating education policy, subject only to the ultimate authority of the General Assembly. You know, our constitutional goal is to seek to ensure that an educational program of high quality is established and continually maintained for all the children in the Commonwealth. In 2017, you know, the board put together and adopted a 5-year comprehensive work plan. That plan included as our first goal, how do we bring equity through the system? And obviously that's not an overnight fix. That's a, you know, a concept and a construct that we're using to push forward. But that work, that fairly detailed work, resulted in the prescription of standards of quality by the board in 2019. The heart of those standards of quality were the support, the recognition of the importance of teaching to educational outcomes, number one, and number two, to provide support, appropriate supports throughout the Commonwealth so that we can improve the quality of teaching. You know, today with the retreat, we are really embarking on another aspect of that work, you know, providing high quality education for all of our students. And, you know, today I expect us to begin the discussion of how do we support the development of the most impactful component of our system, that is our teachers. We will discuss the linkage of an evaluation system with professional development opportunities. Although I'd like to tell you that this is groundbreaking, actually it's not. It finds its roots in statute, which says that evaluation shall include identifications of areas of individual strengths and weaknesses and recommendations for appropriate professional activities. You know, it is my view that if every player in the system, that is the broad system that educates our young people, did their roles well, we would have tremendously great outcomes. I hope that as we march through this work, it will be, the outcome will be that we take this code mandate very seriously and do that very well, with the impact being excellent outcomes for all of our students. We have a variety of well-known and excellent speakers for today. We have a panel that will be moderated by Dr. Wilson. I am told that our retreat is being live streamed on the VDOE YouTube channel. For our YouTube watchers, the chat feature is disabled as it is not monitored by staff. The best way to contact the board is via email at BOE, as in Board of Education, at doe.virginia.gov. And again, I'll note the board does plan to resume in-person meetings for our June 16th and 17th sessions. With that, I will turn it over to our first excellent speaker, formerly my favorite deputy secretary and now assistant superintendent, I guess is the correct title, I hope, close, Holly Coy.
Wonderful. Thank you, President Gecker. Good afternoon, board members, Dr. Lane, and other esteemed guests. It is a pleasure to be with you this afternoon and to kick off our conversation with a bit of history and overview of the board's authority and the statutory and regulatory framework that exists in Virginia related to both teacher evaluation and professional development. And President Gecker has already hit on a few of the high notes, tying these together within our policy framework in the Commonwealth. But I hope that over the next few minutes here, I'll provide some additional context for how these two components interplay and really set a foundation for your conversation this afternoon and beyond. So today, as we get started, a lot of our conversation will be rooted in Standard 5 of the Standards of Quality. This is kind of the linchpin for the framework that we're going to talk about today. And you'll see at the top of the screen here a quote from Standard 5 that notes that leadership is essential for the advancement of public education in the Commonwealth. And within that word leadership, we obviously also interpret that to mean leaders, the people behind public education. And so, as I mentioned, Standard 5 really connects the evaluation piece to the professional development piece and will be the basis for a lot of this conversation here today. As you all well know, licensure and mentorship requirements are other driving components, particularly around professional development. But you can go right on ahead, Emily, with the slides. We're going to start with teacher evaluation as the foundation and then kind of move on to what else code and regs say about professional development and licensure and their implications. So these two are explicitly linked and Standard 5 is the same place where we see the uniform performance standards for evaluation. You all are intimately familiar with those, having just voted to update them last month, but all of this is tied together in Standard 5. Emily, you can go ahead to the next slide, which includes kind of the core language from that standard. And I'll leave that there while I share a bit of history for you all. Just to simply note that this standard, as all of them have, has evolved over time. In 1999, we see language first emerge here on standards for superintendents and principals to include implementation of the SOLs and documentation of teacher performance based on student academic progress. So that was one of the first times that the student progress was tied in explicitly. But again, those were standards for superintendents and principals. In 2004, the standard was updated again to include the uniform performance standards and evaluation criteria for teachers. Again, kind of including that linkage back to student performance. And then in 2005, it was updated once again to be what you see before you hear, and requiring local school divisions to use evaluations that are consistent with these performance standards that the board puts forward. So your work on those performance standards is at the heart of fulfilling this standard of quality, tying both the evaluation and the PD system. Just by way of quick reference here, on the left-hand side, you will see those 8 performance standards, including number 6, the new culturally responsive teaching and equitable practices item that you voted on last month. There are obviously lots of other implications for teacher evaluation beyond PD. So on the left-hand or on the right-hand side of the screen here, excuse me, you'll see those other kind of code references and notes about the other places that Virginia's policy framework ties teacher evaluations into other actions as it relates to probationary terms of service for teachers, renewals of contract or non-renewals of contracts, and grounds for dismissal. So from there, we'll segue to the professional development piece of all of this. So as you saw, Standard 5 really links evaluation and professional development together. But then there are lots of other pieces of our statute and our regulations that touch on PD in some way, shape, or form. And so I've put a couple of the highlights here for you. We think about licensure requirements as the primary driver there. The statute includes some requirements that you're familiar with, such as first aid, CPR, dyslexia, and some endorsement-specific criteria. That code section, that part of the statute, is also where we find the new requirements from the General Assembly that passed in this 2021 session around cultural competency training as a requirement for both initial and renewal of licenses. Other sections of the code also speak to mentorship, and we'll come back around to this topic at the end. This is obviously a topic that you all have been very interested in over the last few years, and tying that mentorship into teacher evaluation, teacher performance, as well as student outcomes. And then the last two here are kind of one-off. Not easily tied into some of these other larger topics, but the code does create ABTEL, as you know, your advisory committee on licensure matters, and so important to note that that is part of the statutory framework here, as well as requiring school boards to adopt policies to provide incentives for excellence in teaching, again, kind of getting to the outcome piece of teacher quality. So we are going to revisit Standard 5 with this professional development lens in the next slide. Oh. We're going to talk about cultural competency in the next slide. My apologies. So I mentioned this previously, just by way of ensuring everyone has the same context for this new requirement. This was a recommendation that came out of the African American History Education Commission. They were established in 2019. They delivered recommendations in the summer of 2020. You all took action on their recommendations related to our history and social science standards, but they also had a number of professional development recommendations as part of their final report. Those recommendations were picked up by the governor, Senator Locke and Delegate Jenkins, and these two bills passed through the General Assembly this session. The bill has a number of requirements as it relates to cultural competency of educators, and it phases them in over the next few years. There are four main components to this. First, cultural competency in the Uniform Evaluation Performance Standards, and you all have already checked that off of your to-do list. You completed that last month. It also requires cultural competency training as part of initial licensure and renewal of licenses. It also requires specifically that those who are seeking an endorsement in history or social studies receive instruction or training in African American history. It then also requires the Board of Education to issue guidance on cultural competency training by December of this year, and subsequently requires local school boards to adopt their own policies aligned with your guidance and to train those staff who are both licensed and employed every 2 years. And that first initial training has to happen before the 22-23 school year. So as we think practically ahead to your work, there is a requirement that you issue guidance on this topic by the end of this calendar year, and that school boards then deploy their own policies and put the mechanisms into place to ensure that their staff are trained for the first time before they start school in the 22 school year. So we would anticipate that lots of training would be happening next spring and summer along those fronts. I want to pause here and just note that the requirement for initial license, renewal of license, and the endorsement, as of July 1, the Board of Education has to take action on this front. The General Assembly also approved some funding for the department to develop this professional development. And so as we understand their intentions as a package, that we would put together that training, make it available to teachers in the field, and then the requirements would go into effect for initial licenses and renewal of licenses. This does not mean that every license as of July 1, licensee as of July 1 necessarily has to have that training already in place. And we can talk more about that as you all have questions. There are a number of statutory requirements when it comes to licensure, but because this is the newest one, I wanted to pause here and provide that context for you, recognizing that we'll be having many conversations on this topic in other places. So as we continue on in our professional development journey, on the next slide, you will see a kind of high-level summary about how Standard 5 parses out responsibilities on the professional development front between the Board of Education and local school boards. And so, as in so many things in public education, this is a joint effort, each of us with our own responsibilities. So it does require the Board of Education to provide guidance on high-quality professional development, and requires local school boards to also take action in making professional development available to their employees, to review their professional development offerings regularly, annually actually, and assess whether or not they are of high quality, effective, and what participation amongst their employees is like. Local school divisions are also required to include professional development in their comprehensive plans. And so we see from Standard 5 that evaluation and PD are tied intricately together, but there is also shared state and local responsibility, and that this infuses much of the work at the division level as well. On the next slide, you will see a couple of the specific items that Standard 5 outlines when it comes to what local school boards are required to provide when it comes to high quality professional development. And so you will see here, and I won't read all of this to you, that there are a couple of topic areas broadly that Standard 5 speaks to and requires, again, that local school boards shall provide this high quality professional development to their employees. And I'll pause there while you finish reading that slide. There's a lot of content there. You see, go ahead, Emily. So we know that professional development is supposed to be available to staff, but what do staff actually have to do with all of that? This brings us to our licensure regulations for school personnel. And so there are, as you know, many requirements for initial licensure, renewal of licenses, as well as the specific criteria for endorsements. The licensure regulations have recently been amended to reflect the 10-year licenses instead of just the 5 years, and to reflect the need to earn the 270 professional development points over 10 years. There is guidance on this as well. The DOE publishes a high-quality professional development criteria document in fulfilling part of the charge to the state to provide guidance on what is high quality in this space. And you'll see here a link to that document. On the next slide, you'll see a little bit more detail on all of this. So you'll see that the 270 points over 10 years are required as the license for license renewal. There are 8 different types of activities which are currently permitted, and those are listed on the right-hand side of the screen for you. And then I think it's important to note that there have been conversations swirling with ABTEL and amongst this body about how staff fulfill those 270 points and how those are aligned back to teacher evaluations and the content areas of teacher evaluation. And then on our final slide here, I will speak just briefly to the statutory framework around mentorship. So the code does charge the board in establishing guidelines for mentor-teacher programs, tying the need for mentorship back to performance of our school staff, and setting the onus on the Board of Education to set those guidelines, the criteria about who is involved and to what extent. And there is guidance issued by you all on that topic. So I hope that this has provided a helpful context for within the board's broad constitutional and statutory authority, what currently exists in the code, really rooted in Standard 5, tying PD and evaluation together. I think that this framework provides both encouragement that you are thinking about them together in the right ways, but also certainly opportunity to continue to refine the system to ensure that at the state level we're delivering on our role and responsibility in supporting both evaluation and professional development of school staff around the Commonwealth. So with that, I will stop and happy to answer questions and or entertain discussion as you all see fit.
Are there any questions? But first, let me say thank you, Holly, for the excellent presentation. I think the board has a deeper understanding of what our obligations are in this area. And the work we're about to undertake is really geared toward fulfilling those obligations. So any questions? Oh, Dr. Wilson?
Thank you. Thanks, Holly, for the overview. Very helpful. And if I should know this already, please tell me, go back and find it. You mentioned Abtel's work around exploring topical areas around PD. Is that on their website right now, or is it coming up at their future meeting? Where will I find it?
I may have to phone a friend on that. I don't believe that there's anything on their website. My understanding is that they have not made any decisions or recommendations by any means. They have been discussing that as a possibility. And in light of the action the board took last month on teacher evaluation, are continuing in their conversations on that. But I see that Patty has jumped on here to help me out in answering that one.
Yes, Abtel will be meeting on Monday to make recommendations to the Board of Education, and the agenda items are actually on the website now, but they have not made any decisions as of this time. The topics that we will discuss on Monday are aligned with the performance standards that the board approved.
Thank you. So I'll find those in the materials, some outline of what those topics might look like or could look like.
That's correct. If
Thank
you go to
Yeah, I got it up right here.
Oh,
Yep.
good. You found it.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Okay, anybody else? If not, again, thank you, Holly, for the work, and we look forward to continuing on down this path with you. I'm very pleased to introduce the Secretary of Education for the Commonwealth, Atif Carney. I will say that a couple of years ago, the professional development has been a topic that Secretary Carney has been interested in for a while. A few years ago, he and I spoke at some length about ways we could improve professional development. At that time, honestly, the board was just beginning the equity work, and that took precedence. Now, finally, we are turning to the work that he wanted us to do, 2 years ago. Atif has agreed, not to tell any jokes at all during his entire presentation, because one of the other things I've learned during the 3+ years we've worked together is he's not very good at it. So, I don't know what's going to come back now, but something bad will happen to me.
Oh gosh.
In any event, it is my pleasure to introduce my friend, the Secretary of Education for the Commonwealth, Atif Carney.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dan, it's always a pleasure to be with you, and always appreciate your very thoughtful and kind introductions as always. Never poking fun at me, so I really appreciate that a lot. As you can see, I can't tell jokes because I can't hear anyone. If they're laughing or not. So, but it's great to be here with the board. I know it's been a while, and great to see all the beautiful faces. It's definitely by far the best looking board in the Commonwealth. And that's not a joke at all. So I really mean it, and great to see all the great leaders, thoughtful leaders. And thank you so much for your work. I can't believe we're 3.5 years in, and really appreciate everything you've done. And I was talking to Dan last night about it a little bit, kind of, touch base on what we had discussed 2 years ago with professional development. But before I jump into that, I also want to recognize your work on the standards of quality and putting a marker down that you all did in October of 2019 with the revised standards of quality. I know folks might feel a little bit frustrated that we might not be moving fast enough in that, but I'll tell you, that has been a game changer. And as I talk to legislators and folks in the governor's office, people are talking about it. It has made a profound impact on their thinking on how do we fund our schools. And I know we made some movements with school counselors. We have some movement with a support staff ratio. And I'm very optimistic that in the coming years, in the 6 to 8 years, we'll get those fully funded. I really feel good about it. And it's, the Board of Education is on the cutting edge of that reform and really leading the Virginia on the national front in that. So thank you all the board members. And also want to recognize, I know we have some new incoming members, our Teacher of the Year, Mr. Anthony Swan, and one of my mentors, Dr. Roberson. Welcome to the board. So excited to see you all on, and you're joining a great team here as well. I also want to recognize, I don't know if Kathy, if you got a chance to say hello. I was running a few minutes late, but Deputy Secretary of Education, Kathy Bircher, is on as well. And I know that she'll have some things to say about teacher evaluation and professional development here in a minute. And I would, I never can fully express my gratitude for our Department of Education. They're just an amazing team. They're the best agency in the Commonwealth and the best Department of Education anywhere in the country. Really mean it. So Dr. Lane, thank you for your leadership and all the wonderful people. I see Holly, Michael, Leah, Patty, so many of you all on. I'm sorry if I missed anybody. They're just amazing and always step up to help with the governor's initiatives. And not only that, but really demonstrate great leadership in the equity work and really looking out for everyone, especially during the pandemic. Has been a tough 14 plus months, but we are in a really good spot as the vaccination is now available to all folks in the Commonwealth above 16. As a matter of fact, we're hearing good things that Pfizer might be available as early as end of May for 12-year-olds and above. So I've been visiting a lot of schools, and things are looking really good. Speaking about visiting schools, I've seen that there's been a cultural shift. Folks are talking a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion and all the great work you've done at the Board of Ed. I know that the next 2 years, as you embark on this journey to really look at teacher evaluation and professional development, I know that our department has been proactive in developing professional development with whether it's social emotional learning or trauma-informed practices or cultural competency, and making our school communities more culturally inclusive for everybody's need and culturally responsive, and focusing on culturally relevant practices. I've learned a lot in the last couple of years. 2 years ago, when I met with you all and talked briefly about professional development, and then Dan and I have followed up a lot, and he made a promise. He's a man of his word that he said, hey, just give us time. We just don't have the bandwidth right now. We're doing so much with SOQs and a lot of the equity work. And he said before you depart that, he made a commitment, and I appreciate that, Dan, for honoring that commitment. And I'm so excited that you're embarking on this work. There's so many experts around the table that know so much about professional development already. So I won't insult anybody's intelligence, but one thing I'll say is that what my personal vision for professional development is that we really should be focusing on quality and not quantity. I understand we have to measure what everybody's doing, and we have a 10-year licensure mechanism now where we transitioned a couple of years ago, and we have the 270 hours requirement. That's really great. But from my experience and talking to a lot of educators and just personal experience, one of the things that happens is that oftentimes we might front load a lot of those hour requirements for professional development, or we might put them on the back end. And I really think that we, as you're revamping and coming up with this robust, awesome model for what professional development looks like and how that's tied to teacher evaluation, I think if we can figure out a way that we demonstrate that there's ongoing professional development, looking at the different indicators. I know we have 8 indicators now. Those might get updated. Personally speaking, we're big on social emotional learning and really looking at trauma-informed practices. And as Holly was presenting about the mandate from the General Assembly, we were big on culturally responsive pedagogy as well. So how do we measure those things and have different touch points during the span of that 10-year license for an educator? And I know in the presentation, there are different activities that qualify for professional development. And if we can look at that and get a little bit more nuanced and granular and give guidance to the school divisions to see, can we be a little bit more nimble, give more flexibility, especially in that mentorship piece when you're working with teacher mentors. I can tell you a lot of great professional development occurs, but that just didn't qualify as a state professional development. And if there's a way to document that better. And that takes me to the next thing. And I wanted to throw an idea out, and I throw out crazy ideas and you can just, ignore them if it sounds crazy. But I think because we have a centralized teacher licensure system, and we have an amazing team with Maggie and Patty and others, I don't know, maybe it makes sense that we have a centralized system which could be state funded, where teachers can log in their professional development. Now we have some divisions who might push back. I mean, some of our divisions that are larger divisions might have well-established ways to log in professional development. And I know that they speak to our the systems maybe somehow. I'm not a technology expert like Dr. Lane, but I think if a recommendation included something like having a centralized system that creates a seamless way for educators ongoing to log in what they're doing and what kind of professional development they're taking, even if they think that it might not qualify for state professional development, as long as they're logging it. And on the back end, if there's a mechanism that the state has to kind of assess to see if that qualifies for licensure renewal. And I know I'm talking a lot about licensure renewal, but I want to now jump into teacher evaluation. I know we've made a lot of progress to transition from the heavy weight given to standardized testing and taking a more holistic approach. I think we're headed down the right direction. With teacher evaluation, I know it used to be, the old system used to be like more punitive in nature. Now it's more reflective in nature. If we can continue to grow on that, I was talking to Dan about that a little bit last night, is that as we're reflecting with educators, most educators, if you embrace them and say, hey, look, and they recognize what the weaknesses, I knew what my weaknesses were as I reflected. And if given an opportunity to really hone in on professional development, on the weak areas, if somebody has not had good DEI training in their profession for whatever reason, whether there was lack of access to it or so forth, maybe we can focus on that area versus content knowledge. Maybe somebody might have a lot of training and content knowledge, and if they want to have a little bit of balance in their professional development to provide that flexibility. So that's another thing, is that if we can really focus on and let the educators work with their administrators to have some autonomy on what professional development they pick, in addition to the state mandates. I'm not saying we want to completely forego all the great things we want to see in educators, all the different indicators, but at least have some autonomy. And then speaking about administrators and superintendents, it would be nice that we can continue our conversation on professional development for administrators and superintendents as well, and look at their evaluations, and also do professional developments for administrators on how to conduct teacher evaluations better, and how to manage professional development, because administrators are busy, just like teachers and everyone. They have so much on their plate. And I loved my last principal I worked for, but he was so busy and I felt so bad. But we had these requirements to do teacher evaluation, and he would check up. But folks, just because of our outdated system, some folks have a tough time to do those regular check-ins with all the folks they're working with. So maybe giving that flexibility, more and more flexibility. I know that assistant principals play a role in teacher evaluations. Maybe we can kind of broaden that scope a little bit with mentors and so forth, and who legally can do evaluations. And I think looking at that as well, looking at the, and working in the policy space in there. So I know I'm throwing a lot at you. I know these things a lot of you've already probably thought about. But I think this is a great opportunity in the next 2 years for the Commonwealth to completely revamp. And I just want to encourage everybody to be big and bold. I know that this group is already big and bold because you've already demonstrated in so many other initiatives that you're already there. But I'm more excited that the time has finally come, that the board is now fully ready and engaged to address teacher evaluation and really look at professional development. With that, I know I only had couple hours on the agenda. So I want to give the rest of my time to Kathy, because I know she has some thoughts on that. And then Kathy, if you can turn it back to Mr. President after that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary, and thank you all for having me today. I hope, President Gecker, that I can earn the spot of your new favorite Deputy Secretary. I have huge shoes to fill, but I'm hopeful. That's my new goal. And in fact, boss, I think that's going to be my #1 performance expectation on my performance evaluation, is whether or not I can achieve that. But thank you all so much for having me, and everything the Secretary said. He and I talk often about the need to improve linking our performance evaluations to our evaluations to professional development, and ensure that we are not using evaluations simply for any kind of punitive nature. That was not the intention of them, as Holly went and reviewed both the legislative and the regulatory components of evaluation. So ensuring we're really looking at improving performance overall so that our students have the greatest impact from the best teachers and the best school personnel. I'll be really brief, but the Secretary hit on a couple of these things. One is the need to ensure that we are lifting up our school leadership, our principals, especially. Oftentimes we focus a whole lot on the need to improve these things for our teachers, but ensuring that principal mentorship, which are also established in code, and principal professional development and evaluation are also fully linked. It includes a component on their ability to evaluate and work with effectively their staff. And a big part of that, no surprise to you all, is the time component, and certainly implementing some of the, frankly, of the SOQ changes and revisions that you all have described would certainly be a piece of giving our school leaders more time to work directly with the staff. So wanted to mention that. And then also the work that this board has done as the foundation around what is an effective teacher, leader, and classroom, and thinking about that profile work and ensuring that we are aligning what we're doing as far as both evaluations, but certainly professional development, to work towards the goals that this board established in all three of those lanes. I think would be really, really important. I see my good friend Lauren McCullough on the line, who I'm certain will speak to that effectively and far more effectively than I. And then again, allowing for opportunities outside of what we would normally see, frankly, as educators, sometimes front loading or back loading our professional development to meet those requirements. You know, you get your renewal or your new license and you pile some things on, and then you wait a little bit, and then you're like, uh-oh, I need my point, as opposed to really reflecting on how do I become better at my craft and in my profession, and aligning those two. So I won't go on and on about any of those, because frankly, the panelists that you all have gathered here and the knowledge of this board far exceeds anything I can add to this. I did want to lift up Dr. Dare from BCU. I was just there the other day, and obviously this board believes fully and extraordinarily in strong mentorship programs, particularly for new teachers. Again, ensuring that mentorship is not punitive. And frankly, some of the components of both regs and code establish that. Like, if you're not doing well, we're going to get to a mentor, as opposed to lucky me, I have a mentor that can help support me in my career, and they're just doing extraordinary things there. So again, this panel will say far more than I can, but look forward to working with you. And one last thing, I'm going to add on Tucker. I do think there's an opportunity here in the pandemic. My saying during the pandemic is we've been given a lot of lemons. Is there lemonade to be made? And what opportunities are available that have been forced in this pandemic around professional development? Again, micro-credentialing could certainly be a big piece of that, but what other opportunities could be available that have been effective in this last 14 months that we may need to ensure that we are writing into whatever it is moving forward? So continuing to look for lemonade with all the lemons we've been handed would be just one last thing, and I promise that that's the last thing. But I have enjoyed my time listening. I look forward to working with you. And with that, President Gecker, I hope that's my first step to maybe becoming your favorite Deputy Secretary.
Well, thank you, Kathy, for all of that. I guess one of the things I just learned is that deputy secretaries are like my kids. I'm not allowed to have favorites, perhaps. But
Holly's still my favorite, so it's pretty fun.
I do appreciate, your remarks, and Atif's also, and particularly your comment about bringing back building leadership into the conversation. It is something that, if you look at the work plan we have, is included, but frankly, Even I often do not remember to tag it on to the discussion of evaluation and professional development. So issuing that reminder is a particularly helpful thing, I think, at every opportunity. You know, as the SOQ work showed, the two greatest determinants of, you know, how the kids will end up, you know, within the school building are the teacher and the building leadership. And, you know, we should not leave that to the side. So thanks to both of you for taking the time to join us. You know, it's good to hear from, you know, each of you, and we look forward to continuing to work with you, you know, on this and other topics as they come up. Before I turn the retreat over to Vice President Wilson to moderate the panel discussion, we are going to hear from Michael Bowling, the Assistant Superintendent of Learning and Innovation. He will provide an overview of professional development offerings in Virginia Public Schools. Michael, you there?
Yeah, I am. Thank you very much.
There you are. Thank you.
Thank you, President Gecker, members of the board, and all of esteemed members here on this panel. But I really am honored to introduce this panel and to kind of set the stage as we move into this panel of professionals that have been providing professional development throughout Virginia, not only through the pandemic, but also for many years. I would like to first just do a really strong nod to all of the professional educational leaders and also the professional educators out there over the past year that have leveraged technology to accelerate the reliance on technology and the effective utilization of technology to improve education for all students in Virginia. It's been a yeoman's task to put together all this professional development and deliver it. And we had to deliver it not just in person, but we had to do it virtually and then sometimes in hybrid settings. And so everybody has done such a tremendous job throughout Virginia, and these professionals have earned their title as professional educators. And we appreciate them and all of their efforts on behalf of all the kids in Virginia. Having said that, I wanted to set the stage, as I said, for the panel discussion. The panel includes members of a number of different areas. And Emily, if you'll move to the next slide, they represent the different areas and types of professional development that are provided. So that is school-based and school division-based, as well as VDOE sponsored or provided. In addition, professional organizations that provide professional development, IHEs, and also private providers that are contracted by school divisions. Next slide. The first thing that they have to do in each one of these types of professional development or providers is decide what their area of focus is. And having you know, some specific points in here, all of these groups gather information and feedback from their stakeholder groups. And then they determine based on the feedback from their stakeholder groups, and for instance, school and school division based is all based on, their decisions are based on state requirements, their mission, vision, goals, and then their staff's needs. As we move to the professional organizations, it's very similar. It's based on their mission, vision, goals, and also their membership's needs. IHEs definitely are determined by needs of their areas, or you know, the people that they may serve, as well as through grant funding or legislative pieces, or just their interest areas. And then finally, we have private providers that are contracted by school divisions typically, that do provide PD based on their product's focus or user needs. As we move into this panel discussion, I have a list for you of the VDOE sponsored professional developments, as VDOE is not on this panel, but I did want to highlight some of the types of professional development that we provide. The items in red highlight the types of professional development that supports teacher evaluation and their professional development, and provide better instruction for students across the Commonwealth. Then other areas include technical assistance and support, compliance and monitoring, some of the other responsibilities of the Department of Education. Next slide. We do also provide some examples here throughout the next two slides by department, that the types of professional development, technical support that we provide at the Department of Education. It's not an exhaustive list by any means, and you can see the font size is pretty small, but everybody wants to show some of the things and showcase some of the things that they do. So some examples were provided in this and the next slide. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Emily to introduce the panel and say thank you to each of them for participating today. Thank you.
I think that actually that ball should have been tossed to me. I think I'm introducing the panel. No worries, Mr. Boland. I'm introducing the panel and really appreciate the opportunity to facilitate the conversation this afternoon. And I'll start by saying that professional development is actually something of great interest to me. In fact, my doctoral dissertation was on teachers' perceptions of their professional learning. And so from that point forward, through a number of positions across divisions, I've had the opportunity to develop professional opportunities for teachers, to deliver those, and then also to serve as a mentor and a coach for principals and superintendents. So this idea of professional learning and engagement across the arc of one's career is one that's really of great interest to me. So I'm very happy to facilitate this conversation and to introduce our panelists. I'll do that in just a moment, but just as a heads up to our panelists and for those who are listening here, of course, there are questions that we've already identified that we knew people would have. But in the earlier comments from the Secretary, from President Gecker, from others, you may have heard nuggets that actually you would want to speak to that may be part of what you've already prepared. But I encourage you, if you have some insights that you'd like to share in your brief 5-minute introduction of yourself and your organization, please do add those. We also will have the opportunity for us to come back to some of those themes that we heard. And so with that, I will introduce our panel. We have with us this afternoon, Melinda Bright, who serves as the Director of Teaching and Learning for the Virginia Education Association. Melinda, welcome. We also have Dr. Andrew Dare, who serves as the Dean of the School of Education at Virginia Commonwealth University, that other university down the way from me. Dr. Dare, great to see you. Thank you for being here. Dr. Steve Geyer, Assistant Superintendent of Instruction at Goochland County Public Schools. Steve, welcome. Dr. Janine Gorham, Director of Professional Growth and Innovation with Virginia Beach City Public Schools. Janine, welcome. Dr. Lori McCullough, who's already been shouted out this afternoon, the Executive Director of Virginia ASCD. Lori, always good to see you. Thank you for joining us. And finally, on our panel today, we have Dr. Tammy Wallace, Dean of the College of Education and Human Development at Radford University and a former member of our Virginia Board of Education. Tammy, it's great to see you. Welcome back. So again, thank you all for being here. And so again, 5 minutes or so, just with a general introduction of yourselves and the types of professional development offered by your organization or some other tidbit that you'd like to slide in here early into the conversation. So I'm going to take this in, let's take it in reverse order from where I've just introduced. Let's start with Dr. Wallace. Tammy, would you start and talk about professional development at Radford?
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Yes. So being an institution of higher learning, so of course, much of our professional development that we offer is through our coursework, through completion of our many different certificate degree programs, add-on endorsement programs. It's not uncommon to see a cohort of teachers come in and complete the literacy education degree program or the certificate program, trying to get more information, learn more about that science of reading. So that would be an example. In addition to our coursework, we also provide professional development through conferences that we sponsor on our campus or institutes. For example, during the summer months, professionals in the deaf and hard of hearing area come together and get professional development around curriculum. So like last year, they had a focus on visual phonics for teaching reading to deaf and hard of hearing students. We've also held conferences for our state level and regional mathematics and literacy organizations. And so we always encourage our students to attend, but the teachers in our region also attend those important professional development opportunities. In addition to that, we have a Virginia Inclusive Practices Center at Radford University. And so that's to promote inclusion in our school divisions across the state. We've been working with Waynesboro City Schools and Pulaski County Schools as they are working to promote inclusivity, in their schools across their divisions. And they've worked with not only staff, but parents, doing the advocacy work, self-determination work through that center. And then lastly, I think our newest initiative, we're in the business of micro-credentialing. So looking at self-paced, competency-based kind of online professional development opportunities for teachers that they can complete on their own time at their own pace. Through our Impact Lab, we received a large U.S. Department of Education grant a few years ago. And so we have modules on inclusive practice, elementary mathematics, elementary literacy, and classroom management strategies that teachers can complete and earn micro-credentials. We've had some teachers participate through the Commonwealth and then our neighboring states, Tennessee, West Virginia, and teachers were able to use those micro-credentials to earn professional development points within their school organizations. And so those are some of the examples of things that we do here at Radford.
Thank you, Dr. Wallace. Appreciate that. We'll move on to Dr. McCullough.
Thank you. I really appreciate being able to be here. It's an honor to be with you all today. I'm the Executive Director of Virginia ASCD. Sometimes people are curious about what those letters stand for. We try not to advertise it, but I'll let you in on the secret. ASCD stands for the Association for Supervision and Curriculum Development. We don't use that title because frankly, we don't supervise anything and we don't develop curriculum either. So over the years, we have just defaulted to being VASCD. We are an affiliate of ASCD, which is an international organization that has about 70 affiliates. Most of those are in US states and some are in other countries. In Virginia, we have about 1,500 members. They are a beautiful mix of classroom teachers, building administrators, central office administrators, and teacher educators, which we think is one of our strengths. And we love that cross-pollination among all those roles. That 1,500 number does not include our new teacher members. We offer a year of free membership to every new teacher in Virginia who chooses to sign up. And this year, a little over 1,000 did. So we communicate with them separately with some content that is curated just for new teachers. Our professional learning programs and opportunities are not restricted to members. They're open to anyone who chooses to participate. Our flagship program is our annual conference, which happens the week after Thanksgiving every year and has been for, I think, almost 30 years. Up until this past year, that was held in person in Williamsburg. In 2020, that was a virtual conference. We had about 730 people there, and we got some really helpful feedback about from people who typically were not able to attend our conference, primarily because of the travel and lodging costs, who really appreciated the opportunity to have a high quality virtual learning experience. So our fall conference in 2021 will be a hybrid event, and attendees will have the option to attend in person or to take advantage of our virtual offerings, or both. And Melissa George, who's the shout out to Melissa, principal at Kempsville High School in Virginia Beach, is the chair of our conference committee and helps to organize and run that program. In addition to our conference, we each year host a variety of other professional learning programs and experiences for teachers and leaders. They include virtual and in-person conferences and workshops, webinars. We do some book studies. Up until this past year, one of our sort of unique programs was our innovation forums, which were basically site visits to schools in Virginia where we were able to identify effective, innovative practices in happening in implementation. And so we invited folks, and generally we would have a group of anywhere from 30 to 50 educators who would travel to a school, spend a half a day, talk with administrators and teachers and students there, observe in classrooms. And we found that those innovation forums have been really good at kind of cross-pollinating practices across school division lines. And we hope to restart those programs next year. Our most recent focus has been, you'll probably hear a lot about this today from a lot of different people, has been micro-credential development and implementation. We have certain areas, and I'll talk about that later, that we focus on in our micro-credentialing program. Right now, we have our first cohort of teachers enrolled. We have 70 teachers enrolled in one of 4 micro-credentials. Those teachers are from 13 school divisions, and that cohort will finish up at the end of May. We anticipate releasing 6 additional micro-credentials this summer, and starting another cohort that'll run through October. VASCD is led by a board of directors, 20 people strong. It includes 1 teacher, several building level leaders, several division level leaders, including 2 superintendents, some higher ed teacher educators, and 3 amazing, wonderful retired Virginia educators who give us a ton of their time and effort and really enable us to do a lot of the work that we do. So thank you for the opportunity to fill you in.
Great, thank you so much. Dr. Gorham.
Good afternoon. I'm really excited to be here. As was said earlier, I am the Director of Professional Growth and Innovation in Virginia Beach, and it's not just my job, it's my passion. I chose remarks to make to touch on some issues that I know the ABTEL and the board are grappling with. And to do so, I'm going to have to explain a little bit of history of professional learning in Virginia Beach, but I promise it will not be long. In 2001, and I know that might sound scary that I'm going back over 20 years, Virginia Beach added 3 contract days to teacher salaries that were intended to support professional learning. Along with that boost in salary came a contractual requirement to complete 22 points a year. In our attempts to create a comprehensive professional learning program, we inadvertently created a system of compliance, a very large, complicated check the box system that, I'll be frank, was not loved by teachers, did not motivate them, and often felt disconnected from their learning needs. Annually, they had 22 points to complete in May and June. Part of my role was to review the completions, and if teachers did not complete it, they actually had a negative pay adjustment, which was not fun or popular for anybody. Over the years, we began to adjust based on teacher feedback and the evidence of impact. We provided more differentiated opportunities. We introduced greater choice, more flexible options. Some of these changes were directly related to our work around instruction and student-centered learning. How could we talk about personalized learning and not acknowledge that as an option for our adult learners? We also shifted to less division-directed professional learning and more school-based. And this coincided with an emphasis on coaching. We had greater confidence in the expertise in the building, supported by the underlying belief that situating professional learning in the school building allowed for more impact because teachers were learning from and with people that they see every day. There was greater accountability and support with follow-up and more opportunities for feedback. In 2018, we implemented a couple really big shifts to strengthen and make explicit the relationship between professional learning and teacher evaluation, and to really shift those evaluative conversations from how many points did you get this year to what are you learning and what is the impact. We felt that we had the capacity at this point and the evidence to relax the 22-point requirement. And within our teacher evaluation process, we implemented a new component, an annual formative focus, to guide teachers in identifying a learning focus area with steps to document and reflect on their progress during the year. While we still identify and require what we call essential professional learning that teachers do complete each year, we are no longer tracking a set point amount. We're in a bit of a state of transition because after being so point driven for so long, the changes in attitude and mindset take a little bit of time. When professional learning was so focused on being top down, focused on compliance, and sometimes felt punitive, it is taking time for mindsets for both our teachers and our administrators. And as an acknowledgement that I know is not unique to us, we are continuously working to build administrator capacity to provide specific and actionable feedback so that teachers can choose a meaningful learning focus. It's difficult to reflect, for teachers to reflect and do that independently if they aren't engaged in coaching cycles and haven't received quality feedback. We are always looking for new strategies for professional learning to provide opportunities for deep, sustained learning around authentic challenges within professional practice that also honor teacher agency and professionalism. And this is going to sound a little repetitive, but our strategy that I chose to talk about is micro-credentialing. It is one that we really are excited about for the purpose of allowing teachers to demonstrate what they've learned. It shifts the conversation away from how many hours did you sit in a seat in a workshop to what did you learn and what can you do with that? And we think that's really powerful. We've also found a lot of power in just the development of micro-credentials to be able to identify and clearly articulate a competency and the skills that support it takes a lot of deep reflection. And we're not doing that in isolation in our offices. Our teachers are working with us to do that. And that's shifting professional learning from being something that's done to them to something that they are co-creating and doing with us. And that's become much more powerful as a learning strategy, and also to really encourage that continuous reflection and engagement in the learning process. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with you all today and hope to learn from my colleagues across the state.
Thank you so much. Moving on to Dr. Geyer.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. As Dr. Wilson mentioned earlier, I'm Steve Geyer, Assistant Superintendent of Instruction with Goochland County Schools. And I've been in this role for 9 years and was an elementary principal for 11 years prior to that, and a high school English teacher prior to that. And wanted to start by thanking President Gecker, Dr. Lane, members of the board for valuing our input in the membership of this panel today, and wanting to hear from folks across the state in various roles that really do have a hand in professional learning on a day-to-day basis. So thank you for valuing our input, and I look forward to being part of the conversation today. In terms of what I can contribute to the conversation in my role is probably similar to some others. And I will say in a small division like Goochland's, and we certainly have lots of small divisions across the state, folks wear lots of different hats, and professional learning is one of my responsibilities in my role as assistant superintendent. And we really come at that from lots of different angles. And I know that's the case in all school divisions across Virginia. We support our staff through tuition reimbursement programs to take advantage of individual courses or full programs at the graduate level and provide support through tuition reimbursement. which certainly serves as a great opportunity for professional learning. We participate and provide support for our staff to participate in professional learning opportunities hosted by folks represented on this screen, hosted by the Virginia Department of Education, VASCD, and other professional organizations that provide necessary opportunities for staff. We also have partnerships with third-party vendors, for lack of a better term. For example, in our school division right now, we are in the middle of a 3-year partnership with the Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities to continue really important work around really important issues related to diversity, equity, and inclusion in our school division. And so that's an example of partnership with a third-party vendor to really provide support for professional learning for staff. We also, like others, design and deliver professional learning in-house, our team providing professional learning opportunities to our team. And as others have mentioned, that is often the most effective professional development that folks receive, because it really is accessible to all and practical, and there's some kind of built-in credibility working side by side with folks that you work with on a day-to-day basis. And so I guess the nugget that I'd like to add when I reflected on this conversation today and my experience in my various roles in education throughout my career is I feel like we're making a shift that I think is a really positive shift, and I'll characterize it this way. I think that there was a time when roughly 75% of the professional development that educators experienced and we delivered to educators was fairly one size fits all by design. And maybe 25% was really personalized to the needs of the individual educator. And it really ought to be the reverse, at least much closer to the reverse, where there is a place for one size fits all professional learning related to some very specific topics, I would say, and needs across school divisions. But I would say that accounts for about 25% of what educators need. And the other 75%, to be effective, really needs to be personalized in nature, in the same way that our teachers work incredibly hard to personalize the experiences for students in classrooms. That's the same thing that our professional educators need. And so one of the big shifts in our school division to be able to move toward that, what I would say is a better proportion, is we have invested over the last several years in coaching, on-site coaching positions within our school division to provide instructional coaching support to staff. And as I mentioned, we're small. We have 2,600 students, 5 schools. 5 years ago, or 6 years ago, we had 0 coaches in our school division providing that type of support. We now have 7, I'm happy to say, and those folks are dedicated to providing ongoing professional learning opportunities for staff embedded in their day-to-day job experience. So that means modeling, teaching for our professionals, co-teaching and teaching alongside our professionals, and providing that ongoing support and coaching so that it's not a one and done approach. It's not a one size fits all model. It truly is individualized coaching based on what individual educators need. And that has been more impactful really at the school and classroom level than anything I've experienced in my career. And I would say coaching is one of the ways we can get at that personalized approach that I think our educators desperately need. So that would kind of be the topic that I would focus, maybe some perspective that I can bring to the conversation today. And I look forward to participating. Thank you, Dr. Wilson.
Thank you, Steve. Dr. Dare?
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. Good afternoon, everyone. Pleased about the opportunity to be here. I see familiar faces in this group, so that's always nice. You know, this June, actually, June 1 will be 5 years for me here at VCU, which I can't believe it's been that long. What attracted me to VCU is what still attracts me to VCU, in that we're an urban serving public research university. And I take that quite literal in that as its school of education, I believe that we need to function almost like first responders going to where the largest fires are in terms of issues that needs to be addressed. And it's clear that one of those areas relates to differences in student learning outcomes, particularly in our hardest to staff schools, our schools, whether they be rural or urban, with high concentrations of poverty, and our schools with Black and brown school children. So we've done a fair amount in the school to try to lean into this area. We've made adjustments in our strategic plan to where our mission for the school is to ensure that we're leaning into this area. My aim as dean, has stayed the same, which is for us to be the leaders in preparing educators and other professionals for success and impact with all school children, but especially those who have been historically marginalized, underrepresented minorities, and those living in poverty. A few years ago, I started an Office of Strategic Engagement to really lean not only into the type of professional development in this space, but in all honesty, as also a strategic approach to ensure that we're providing those opportunities for our teacher aid candidates. For those of you all who are in higher ed, you're aware that faculty own the curriculum. So unlike if I was a head of Microsoft, I can come in and I can say, hey guys, we're going to stop making floppy drives. Well, in higher ed, the folks have to decide they want to stop making floppy drives. And you all know how useful floppy drives are now. But by developing an Office of Strategic Engagement, we work aspirationally to focus our professional development on culturally responsive practices and pedagogy and anti-racist practices and pedagogy. And so we're doing that in our professional development. We want to be bold, we want to be impactful, we want to be transformative in the work that we do. We want to develop professional development, or we're developing and facilitating professional development that's interactive, it's reflective, and it really dives deep into race, racism, and systemic bias. I'll be transparent that I do feel that DEI efforts has gotten colonized and monetized. And what I mean by that is, as a unit that provides professional development, you can get way more business if you don't talk about race, you don't talk about racism, and you don't talk about systemic bias. We have actually had to we've actually had some school divisions reach out to us to say, hey, we like what you're doing, but can you provide this for us? But we don't want you to talk about race or racism. And we say, I'm sorry, we can't do that because we don't believe that you can prepare culturally responsive practitioners without talking about race and racism. So, we have a Becoming an Anti-Racist Educator series that we launched this fall. We were actually working on that from actually the spring semester prior to everything with George Floyd. And we are at the tail end of our first series. We're developing a second and third series of that. We actually have launched also a Becoming an Anti-Racist Higher Education Leader program. We launched that in the spring. We're beginning to integrate micro-credentialing in the work that we do. However, we also believe that we're not going to PD our way out of what I would identify as a crisis of preparing educators to be able to successfully and impactfully work with all school children. We just completed our Cape visit. We had the exit interview yesterday. We, are going to get reaccredited with no AFIs. Excited about that. But the reality is, if you take a deep look at the Cape accreditation, it offers you zero in truly preparing educators to work with all school children. We do a good job of preparing folks to work at Cosby High School, where my kids went, or Deep Run, or some of these other suburban schools, but we have to fundamentally do things differently in our EPPs. And I am ridiculously excited about the outstanding work that's coming out of VDOE and this board, but I also have a deep concern that the expectations for our educators are moving way faster than the requirements of how they need to be prepared in colleges and schools of ed. It's taken a few years. I've been able to create a very strong and powerful DEI committee within our school. We had a faculty vote and we all agreed to some very ambitious initiatives, including a 2-year process to decolonize the syllabi of all the courses in our school. We're going through an intergroup dialogue training to ensure that our faculty are able to meaningfully engage in conversations and topics around race, culture responsiveness. We've added a significant amount of professional development within our school because we feel that it goes beyond the curriculum, right? And I think this is something else that we believe strongly is our educators are well prepared, but the challenge that they have, and I hope this is not too problematic to say, is that we're also all victims of some intentional strategies to misinform and miseducate. We don't teach folks about the true contributions of underrepresented minorities in K-12 education. We teach them about a few people, usually during February, that leaves folks believing that these are exceptions. So there's so much that's done. We teach people that George Washington's teeth are made of dentures, not that they were made from the teeth of live slaves. There's so much more that we need to educate so that when we talk about systemic bias and systemic oppression, that folks understand that it's a real issue and that folks are able to connect with students on a human level. And we have the data to support that when we look at school discipline and everything else. So my internal cue said, you're being preachy, shut up. So I will stop there, but I sincerely appreciate the opportunity and look forward to learning from you all and sharing anything that I know.
Thank you, Dr. Dare. Appreciate those comments. Ms. Bright, would you share?
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. Good afternoon, everyone. I am grateful to be invited to participate in this discussion, and I'm inspired already to hear about some of the things that are being implemented in school divisions across the state as far as coaching and personalized professional learning in some of those divisions. So thank you for asking for our input from this panel today. And I am the Director of Teaching and Learning at the Virginia Education Association. We have approximately 40,000 members across the state, and my goal is to provide opportunities to our members to improve their professional excellence. And so I would like to share a little bit about what we offer from our department. And first, let me share that the Department of Teaching and Learning is currently going through a reimagining process about how we support our members in the area of professional learning. In the past, we've had cadres that were trained to deliver face-to-face workshops as they were requested from our members across the state. And this practice is oftentimes not effective for a number of reasons. Will we still offer face-to-face workshops? Yes. When it's safe to do so, we will offer face-to-face workshops. We also have an annual instructional professional development conference every November. And so in addition to those things, what I'd like to focus on today are 3 areas of opportunities that we provide for teachers to learn and to grow their skills. You've already heard a lot about, or you've heard the term micro-credentials several times already. And I definitely want to lift up micro-credentials, and also in the context of a professional learning community to facilitate collaboration as teachers work through micro-credentials. We at the VEA offer approximately 200 micro-credentials, and these were developed and made available through the National Education Association. They can be accessed through a portal on our website, and any teacher, excuse me, any teacher in the state can access those micro-credentials and earn a badge. It is free to VEA members. There is a charge for non-members. Later on, when we talk about what the research tells us about professional learning, I'll talk a little bit more about how micro-credentials align with that research. I feel very strongly about that. We are also in the process of developing professional learning opportunities for our members, by our members. We are recruiting some of our members who evidence expertise in particular content areas. We plan to bring on teams of 4 to 6 content developers for each area that we've identified, and they are going to be selected through an application process. They're going to receive training on adult learning and building communities of learners. And the content areas that we are going to be developing are trauma sensitivity, first of all, social and emotional support for students, cultural competency, digital pedagogy, and instructional skills. So that is something that we are in the process of planning and implementing. We're getting ready to put out our first application for the first group of content developers. And then we will phase in each of those areas. So we have lots of new and exciting professional learning opportunities coming. Another thing that we're going to be doing very soon, we're going to be adding a teaching fellow to our department for 2021-2022 school year. And that teaching fellow is going to focus specifically on supporting and developing our members for national board certification. That's something that the VEA used to support. We haven't done a lot of that in the last couple of years. So we really want to focus on that. We're hearing from members that that's something that's very important to them, and to help, again, elevate their professional excellence by supporting national board certification. So those are kind of the big items I wanted to hit on, and I'll leave it at that for now. And again, thank you so much for letting me be here to participate in this conversation.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for your opening remarks. And I've been making notes furiously, and we have a number of questions that we've identified up front. But I know that, again, I have a list, and I'm sure fellow board members have a list of questions as well. So I think the best way maybe to make sure we hit the opportunities that we have for our panelists to provide a bit more information. Again, we have those questions. We'll do that, take a few questions here, then pause for a moment, see what questions board members may have, and then circle back to any of the questions that we haven't necessarily gotten to through board inquiry. Is that okay for our panelists? So to start with, if anyone who would like to, please don't feel obligated for everyone to respond, but certainly if you have a response, can you somebody talk a little bit about how you all go about identifying the professional development focus areas or topics that you will provide? So at the division level, I know many of you talked about, kind of this collaboration, the idea of coaching, but how generally do divisions and schools identify what topics they're going to offer around professional development? And at the higher ed level, many of you already talked about professional development coursework that you may offer, but just help us understand what your process is for identifying topics. Would anyone like to start?
Dr. Wilson, I'm happy to jump in.
Thank you very much. I was giving a little bit of wait time.
Sure.
Go ahead.
As was I guess I was influenced by the silence. In terms of responding to Dr. Wilson's question at the school division level, again, I go back to kind of that ratio that I mentioned before. But when it comes to division-wide efforts to identify topics, we look at data and let the data, all kinds of data, as you can imagine, and I can certainly get into what kinds of data we look at, but we let the data point us to areas that maybe there would be some needs for professional learning across our school division. So that's kind of number one. And then number two, we ask our team every year where they think that they would have needs related to professional learning. And so that would kind of be the second way in terms of division-wide efforts. And then beyond that.
Steve, I'm sorry, before you go to
yes,
the school level, can you talk a little bit about what some of those items are or what those data points are at the division level that would drive, just so that we have an understanding, where are you getting that data that would point you toward PD?
Sure. Well, obviously student outcomes, student performance related to academic performance. So we are a division that's been committed for a number of years to focusing on the individual growth of every student. And we use the MAP assessment. So we use that individual growth data through MAP to really help uncover where there might be some deficiencies in terms of opportunities we're giving students and what teachers are delivering in the classroom, whether it's instructional strategies or a lack of resources or whatever it might be. And certainly we look at achievement data as well. So data related to student outcomes in terms of student performance. And then we look at survey data. We look at discipline, crime and violence data. We look at absence data. Again, as we all know, there's no shortage of data out there for us to analyze and make decisions about what our folks need. So Dr. Wilson, I hope that helps. And then the last thing really is to kind of circle back to that personalized approach. So what I just described is a portion of our efforts on a year-to-year basis, but the majority of our efforts are really focused on what we're able to provide at the individual teacher level, the individual instructional team member level, related to coaching. And I don't know that I did it justice before, but I think everybody would agree that part of the challenge related to professional learning is just simply how busy everyone is. And so by having coaching available on the job while teachers are delivering instruction to students really helps in that regard, where oftentimes the more one-size-fits-all division-wide approach is generally after hours or disruptive to classroom instruction because it pulls teachers out of their primary work, which is working with students. So again, we rely heavily on coaches building those relationships with our instructional team to really hone in on exactly what those individual teachers need.
And are your coaches full-time dedicated coaches, or are they teachers released for a period of time during each day?
Yeah, great question. So we have 7, which isn't a lot, but it's a great start. And we've built that team over the last several years. They're full-time, and actually for next school year, full-time teacher contracts. So they're here when our teachers are here. Next year, we actually were able to build into the budget to put all of our coaches on extended contracts. So they will actually have additional time into the summer to do curriculum work and planning and working with teachers beyond the typical teacher contract. So another positive step in the right direction.
Great, thank you so much. Anyone else, how you identify topics? Janine?
Yeah, so I can add on a little bit from the division perspective. I echo what Dr. Geyer said about the looking at data, student outcomes, variety of sources. We also align our professional learning to our strategic framework and our division initiatives. We have lots of metrics to measure progress, and we use those to guide division professional learning. I alluded to also earlier about the importance of school-based professional learning. For example, we have 55 elementary schools, and as you can imagine, there's a lot of diverse needs across schools. So we work closely with our school leaders to plan professional learning that addresses the needs of that particular school. And generally, a lot of those conversations happen through our school improvement process.
Thank you. Other thoughts? Dr. Dare.
So in our Office of Strategic Engagement, we do have an advisory council. And on this council, we do have a few faculty, but we have folks from the surrounding school divisions, and they provide us input and guidance in terms of what professional development needs would be helpful. We also lean quite a bit on state level data. As I said before, we are really trying to focus more on intentional professional development related to culturally responsive practice, pedagogy, anti-racist practices, those types of things, because we really do believe that there's some root causes in that area that contributes to some of the challenges and disparities we see in student learning outcomes. We do believe that it plays a role even in the retention of teachers, because we know the demographics for our teachers. This is oftentimes the first time they're in an environment, for some, where they're not at least the demographic majority. There's not an understanding, so to speak. And so we really try to look at the state data, listen to what VDOE is saying in terms of what the needs are, and trying to develop and provide professional development that we believe is more at root cause types of issues. And I've said this also before, but we also understand that that limits our market, so to speak, because we do know that, there are superintendents that want to do a lot, but, their boards might be more concerned about them leaning into certain areas, so we know it's complex out there, but we feel that it's important to do this work in order to prepare educators to be successful and impactful with all school children.
Thank you. Anyone else? Go ahead.
Dr. Wilson.
Dr. Wallace, and then Dr. McCullough.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. A lot of our work kind of evolves from our relationship with our school partners. So at Radford University, our faculty are scholar practitioners, meaning they are deeply entrenched in schools as they train and support new teacher candidates. And so when teachers are interested in learning about a new particular strategy, so several years ago, Lucy Calkins, writer's workshop, so they would pull in faculty for that. When we changed one of our supervision models, gearing toward producing more inclusive educators, the faculty members assigned to that school and the teachers read and studied co-teaching models and collaboration. And so here, 5 years later, we are co-placing candidates from general education and special education. They're learning how to teach together, plan together for the betterment of all the children in the classroom. And that evolved from that relationship between those faculty members and those K-12 partners in doing that work. So that's where a lot of our PD comes from, through those relationships.
Thank you. Dr. McCullough, go ahead.
Thank you. I can give a brief overview and an example. We start with our mission. Because it's VASCD, it's going to be about pedagogy, and that's operationalized right now in the profile of a Virginia classroom and around strategies, pedagogies for deeper learning. So we start with that. And then we look at what's important right now in the state. So we take many of our cues from work you're doing. We look at emerging research and literature in the field because we want all of our professional learning to be evidence-based. And we look at what our members and other practitioners around Virginia are telling us. We find that out from our 8 board members who are regional representatives in every superintendent's region. And we also have a programs team that's led by Chris Jones, principal at Thomas Dale in Chesterfield. He works with a team of about 16 teachers and building level administrators around the state who we also get input from. So I can give you a current example. We have been talking about, given our mission and given our focus around the profile of a classroom, where is VASCD's place in the equity work? What's the intersection of all of that universe of effort with the profile of a Virginia classroom? And we took that through the process and we identified 2 or 3 areas, one of which is grading practices. We are the curriculum instruction and assessment people, so we're very interested in student assessment and grading. And we know that there is a lot of evidence that traditional grading practices that are currently used in lots and lots of schools are detrimental to lots and lots of kids, particularly marginalized students. And we also know that there are alternatives to those grading practices, that there are strategies that instill hope and motivate kids to keep trying and to perform better. And so one of our focus areas, that will be one of our focus areas for our programming in the next few months. So that's an example of how we work through that process.
Great, thank you very much. So I want to ask a question about, I'm sorry, Ms. Bright, did you want to jump in? I'm sorry.
That's okay. Just briefly, I would like to add, just as Lori just mentioned, looking at from a statewide perspective, input from educators is very important, but oftentimes they don't even know what they need, or they don't know how to articulate what they need. So we as well try to anticipate the needs of our members based on the current context of schools and the barrage of changes that they're currently facing. And so we also monitor state and local changes and needs and how they impact educators. For example, I can also give an example of something that we're currently looking at relative to the new performance standard for teachers. We are developing professional learning by our members, for our members, recruiting members with expertise in the area of culturally relevant teaching, cultural responsiveness, and they're going to receive training and best practices on adult learning and on building those communities of learners, and then facilitate that learning process. Since that's a new performance standard being added to the evaluation system, we know that that is something that we want to offer to support our members in. So thank you.
Thank you. So I want to ask a question about research, and I think Ms. Bright mentioned this maybe in the first or in her introduction, and talking a little bit about that. So recognizing that there are things, some aspects that are working well that you all have identified in your particular organizations or in your school divisions. We know that there are some things that are going well, but we also know that professional development has not necessarily reached the level of perfection that we might like. So as you all think about it, what would you suggest might be some barriers that are preventing us from getting to that desired state as it relates to professional development for our teachers here in the Commonwealth, or even nationally, right? What does the research tell us? Why aren't we getting there? I'll start maybe with Dr. McCullough. Do you mind starting?
I'd be happy to start. Thank you. I would start by just reminding us of what Steve Geyer said earlier about coaching and the resources that, how difficult it is to come by the resources to have that kind of personalized professional learning. There's a lot of research about what transfers from knowing to doing. In other words, once you learn something, we know that teachers go to conferences. I hate saying this because I do conferences for a living, but we know that when teachers go off to conferences or workshops and come back to school, the chances of them implementing what they learned are anywhere from 0 to 5%. Yet we invest enormous resources in sending people to conferences. The trick to transfer is what Steve described, is having someone to work with you once you're back in your school to provide mentoring, coaching, any kind of feedback. You can get that transfer into practice from 5% up to 95% by providing that kind of job embedded coaching and feedback. But we tend not to put resources there. So we're actually diminishing the potential impact of what teachers are learning by not providing them the follow-up that really cements that and transfers it into practice. I would say the second point I would make is that we don't pay much. And when I say we, I mean some of us. I know there are exceptions and there are wonderful, effective things going on all over the place, but traditionally we haven't paid much attention to results of professional learning. Think about the amount of time and resources that we spend looking at student data and analyzing and reflecting on what students have learned and how they have grown and what their performance is. I would submit that the analysis of the effectiveness of professional learning and the degree to which it transfers into teacher practices and in turn impacts kids is really missing from our system. So those would be my two big ones, my two big barriers.
Who else would like to jump in? Dr. Dare?
I think one challenge that we have with assessment is that there are some areas of professional development that are a little bit easier to measure. You know, if we're looking at skill sets that are more tactical, you know, we can look at student learning outcomes, we can look at school-wide data, we can look at district-wide data. But specifically within the space of culturally responsive practice, the challenge there is it's much harder to measure success with respect to critical reflection, but that critical reflection is going to be key to the tactical success. And I think that's what makes it very challenging, is that there's almost a shift in ideology that I think needs to happen. And that shift is what's harder to measure. And we're also in the position where we are more in control to establish the metrics that might lean towards us looking much better, whether that's at a building level, a division level. So that's also an area where we have to be cautious, because we can really justify easily some things that maybe shouldn't be justified.
Thank you. Ms. Bright, I think you were going to jump in there.
Thank you. I just wanted to agree with the comments that Lori made about the research, and are we paying attention to the research? Are we aligning what we do with the research? Are we purposeful and intentional when we're developing professional learning opportunities about what we expect the outcomes to be? And once we decide what we want those outcomes to be, how are we going to know when we get those outcomes? How are we going to measure those? And then what are we going to do with the results? And then also, I'd like to go back to something that Secretary Carney said earlier, and that is perhaps we need to focus more on quality and being more purposeful and intentional rather than quantity, because there are a ton of opportunities out there for professional learning, and it can be a little overwhelming. And so I just wanted to add that to the comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else with thoughts about how
I'll add,
oh, go ahead, Dr. Gorham.
yeah, I'll add, and it's not a barrier, it's a challenge. And it's the urgency with which sometimes we have to respond with professional learning. Sometimes when we are given requirements, and there's often really good reasons for urgency. We're addressing critical and important needs of children, and there is urgency behind that. But sometimes I have seen that in our haste to respond, and sometimes we have those deadlines given to us, sometimes statutory requirements that have to be met by a certain point, that we have around 5,000 teachers. And so that puts us in a place where we sometimes, to meet that requirement, are designing professional learning that we know meets the requirement, but does not necessarily translate to impactful change. We're going to have to go back and try to figure that out later. And so sometimes the gift of time, in order to really design professional learning that we know can be impactful, the changes that we're asking our educators to make are not quick technical fixes. They are adaptive. They require shifts in beliefs. And that's not something you can just tell someone to do or have them watch a 45-minute module and anticipate that you're going to see change happen. Doesn't work that way. But a lot of times, just the sheer urgency with which we have to act causes us to do what we know is not going to be the most impactful.
I appreciate that reminder, Dr. Gorham, about the time it takes to truly learn, process, internalize. I think someone talked about it, this transfer from knowing to doing. Lori, I think you talked about that transfer into practice. Anyone else? Challenges, I like the way you put that, Dr. Gorham, not barriers, but challenges to implementing. So I don't see another hand, so I'm going to move on to one last question and then we'll open it up to board members. A number of you have talked about micro-credentialing as an area of interest or something that you're pursuing. So I'm just curious to know about the transferability of micro-credentials, right? So they are developed and delivered by an organization or perhaps by a division. But what happens to that skill set or the recognition of that skill set, whatever it is, if and when a teacher decides to move to a different school or a different school division? Or how are we thinking about how we systematize or ensure transferability or recognition of those skills? Not on the list of pre-slugged questions, so sorry about that.
I would be happy to start. I think one of the challenges we have with micro-credentialing right now is that, like a lot of things, it's a word that a lot of organizations and school divisions have adopted, and we're all doing stuff. Quite frankly, I will answer one of the questions you didn't ask, Dr. Wilson, and say that I think one of the ways that the board and DOE could really help us in this area is by establishing some quality criteria for micro-credentials, because each group that you talk to is doing it a little differently. And Jeannie Gorham and I have talked at length about this, and Ms. Bright and I have talked at length about this. So we're trying to get organizations and school divisions kind of on the same page. So I can really only speak about the micro-credentials that VASCD has been working on for the past year. We have 17 of those. They have been going through a pretty rigorous review and pilot testing and revision process. So we've only released 4 of them this spring, but all of our micro-credentials are housed on Virtual Virginia. So once a teacher from anywhere in Virginia enrolls, they access all of the materials and all of the directions and all of the resources through a course. It's not really we don't consider it a course, but through a site in Virtual Virginia. The evidence that they submit of transfer, so it's not a question of just completing assignments, but it's a question of completing assignments, submitting evidence of transfer, and then having that evidence reviewed and assessed by an external assessor. When teachers have done that and have met all the criteria showing that they've actually transferred that skill into practice, so the evidence might be samples of student work, videos of lessons, lesson plans, those kinds of things, then they receive 2 things. They receive a digital badge from Virtual Virginia that lists the competency that they've demonstrated, and they receive a certificate from us. And if Ms. Pitts is still on the line, she will remember this conversation that we had where we said, you know, in the future, we might be able to make this more competency based, but right now, in order for people to get credit, it's got to be about points. So part of our pilot study back in the fall was assessing about approximately the amount of time it takes for teachers to complete a micro-credential, which is completely antithetical to the idea of micro-credentials, because the idea is if you already have this competency and you already have this evidence, then you can get the micro-credential. Or maybe you're earlier on the learning curve and you're going to engage in these experiences and use these resources, and it's going to take much longer. But after lots of input and lots of discussion, we are assigning 30 recertification points right now to each one of our micro-credentials. We see it as roughly equivalent to a 1-credit course for most people. We would like to move away from that point system, but right now, you know, we also need to work with what we've got, of course. So right now, the transferability is that those points contribute to your relicensure, and that badge goes with you wherever you go.
I can add a little bit more to that. And I think just like Lori, we had to figure out and balance the tension between needing to operate within the license renewal guidelines and the point system. That's what our teachers still are motivated to earn, but in a competency-based program, you know, working that part out. We did a ton of research, and we've been really working on this for, I would say, probably almost 4 or 5 years before even micro-credentials was a term teachers knew. We actually had a lot of pushback about using the term, and we don't actively use it. But we, one of the things when we investigated where the digital badge lives, where that platform is, we wanted to find one that was outside of Virginia Beach platforms. We could put it as a Schoology badge within Schoology, but then if a teacher left, their badge would not leave with them. So we invested in a platform outside. When we saw VASCD badges and where they lived, we are in the process now of shifting our badges, and we're still feel we're new enough into it that we can shift and put ours there, so that if a teacher, we already had one teacher earn a VASCD one, and with our badges that all live in the same ecosystem. So we were really excited to align ourselves with that, and we hope that may set a direction for other people. When you have a badge on the digital platform, there's metadata that is associated with it, so that anybody looking at it can see what the teacher actually did, what they demonstrated to earn that badge. And that's really important. And that tells much more than just a license renewal transcript with points. You'll know what the teacher did. And we think there's some value in that, because then that says something to maybe the hiring district or or others. I will second what Lori said also about would love to have a conversation to standardize on some criteria for high quality micro-credentials. Lots of organizations and different companies issue badges for sometimes as low level as just participation. And so we would love to see a discussion of really what makes a high quality micro-credential. And we still feel we're novices. We are, every one we have, every micro-credential we have is on multiple iterations, but this is something that I think there's a lot of value in sharing, and we would love to be able to share our work at some point when I feel that we are further beyond the novice stage.
Great, great. Well, let's pause right here and open the floor for questions from board members. You all have given a lot of information, so really appreciate your time and your sharing your expertise. But board members, what questions do you have? Dr. Duran.
Thank you all for your good presentation. Nice to see you, Dr. Wallace. I miss sitting by you in board meetings. Good to see you. Quick question, thinking about the micro credentials and that whole new concept moving forward, can all of you speak to how much would teachers be charged for those, or is it something you're providing as a part of your professional development if it's a school division? But what does that look like for teachers in terms of the cost? Maybe Dr. McCauley.
Feel free to, free feel to jump in.
Yeah, I can speak for our micro-credentials. We are hoping that as we bring micro-credentials more to scale, the cost will go down. Right now, we are charging $100 to enroll in a micro-credential. 75 of those dollars is being used to pay the external assessor, because those people who are assessing assessing the evidence that teachers submit for their micro-credential are going through a pretty rigorous training program, and it's a very time-consuming enterprise. They have to go through reliability checks to be sure that their feedback is on target, that it is aligned with our rubrics, et cetera, et cetera. So that's not the kind of thing that you can just rustle up a bunch of volunteers and do over a weekend. So we are investing in that external assessment process to make it very rigorous and very well aligned, both valid and reliable. And so that's where the bulk of that money goes. We are just hoping that this year, next time, we can say that I will also say that we were the recipients of some money from JFF that flowed through DOE to us, and we used those resources for the development of our micro-credentials. So we're just, what I'm hoping is that next year, this time, we can say our micro-credential is self-sustaining. Right now, it relies on that $25 that we get and the money that we still have from JFF.
Ms. Bright?
Yes, Dr. Duran, for members of the Virginia Education Association, the micro-credentials are free. As I said earlier, any educator in Virginia can access them. If they want to have them evaluated to actually earn the certification badge, we do charge $75. As Lori indicated, that goes to the assessors who have been rigorously trained. And as far as the micro-credentials that we offer, many of them have been developed by teachers who have expertise in those areas. And then they are also, those who have developed them are oftentimes part of the ones who evaluate or assess once the submissions come in. So again, it aligns with what Lori said about $75 to pay for actually having them assessed.
Dr. Wallace, I think you mentioned micro-credentialing with Radford.
Yes.
Want to respond?
Sure, sure. And thanks for the question. So when we first got started, we had this very large U.S. Department of Education grant, several $1 million. And so it was free to teachers. Those grant dollars have since, they no longer exist. They've dried up. And so now our board, which is meeting this week because the semester is ending, last week of classes is this week, and they're going to make a determination about the cost of the micro-credentials. So we'll know more after this board meeting on Friday. So I'll make sure I send that back.
Thank you. Others at the school division level, do you all, how do you, if you're working with an outside vendor or something like that, is there any cost that you pay?
We do it all internally. And currently it's central office staff who are the ones that are doing the assessment. And, there's feedback is really an important component of this. I mean, it's so there's a lot of sometimes more than one feedback cycle. Our goal is to the teachers who have earned the micro-credentials will then help us become part of our assessment team. We did not leap into that this year because we felt teachers had enough on their plates. So that is our goal, and we will pay those teachers. So we will incur a cost at that point, but we feel that's a great teacher leadership opportunity and will continue to deepen their learning.
Thank you. Anyone else with a response to that question?
And Dr. Wilson, the only thing I would add is we don't have an in-house micro-credentialing program like it sounds like some folks have developed, but if our folks were to pursue something from VASAD, for example, that would fall into the same category as tuition reimbursement in terms of financial support. So there would be a process by which we could support our folks that would be interested in outside micro-credentialing.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for that context. It's helpful. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Board members, other questions? Ms. Holton.
Well, thank you all. This has been incredibly valuable to have your expertise and lots for us to discuss in our ongoing conversations. So we'll take all of that with us. I have just a couple of specifics to you, Mr. Geyer, Steve, about your coaching program. We've made recommendations as part of our latest round of SOQ revisions about coaching, mentoring models more broadly. But I'm curious, so you said you have 7 coaches, and I missed how many teachers you said, so I don't know what your ratio is, and I'm interested in how you're deploying them. Are you focusing them mainly on early year teachers, or what? Do you feel like that's enough for the need, and how are you funding them? And do you know whether any other divisions are managing to do anything comparable?
Yes, happy to.
Any or all of those?
Yeah, happy to respond. You covered a lot of ground. I'll do the best that I can. Certainly other divisions have coaches within their programs, and they're probably set up somewhat similarly or maybe a little bit differently. And then there are divisions that don't have the benefit of instructional coaching. And that's certainly where we were just 5 or 6 years ago. I'll say in our division, and again, it's probably very specific by school division, but our coaching program really was built through our one-to-one student computing initiative. And our first coach was an instructional technology coach to support the implementation of one-to-one student computing in one of our schools as we got that program off the ground. And then as that program expanded and we knew there would be a significant need in terms of a technology-rich environment and supporting our students and supporting our teachers, the instructional technology coaching role expanded. And so we grew by a half a coach to a coach for a year or two as that program grew. And then 3 years ago, brought on additional coaches that were not really in the technology house, and they were really focused specifically on instruction. And what we've done over the last couple of years is really bring those two groups coaches together to be more of a unified coaching team. And what we found, and this is all the power of the human resources process, finding great people that can meet your need, is we have 7 folks that can support instructional technology, but they can also support just good teaching and learning and great practices in the classroom. And so we have, as you said, we have 7, we have about 250 teachers. Because we didn't have any not too long ago, 7 feels amazing. And I will say that it certainly isn't enough, and they are crazy busy every single day, and there's not enough of their time to go around because they're so effective. And it really starts and ends with the relationships that they build with teachers to make sure that teachers see them as credible, and folks want to go to them for support, to take risks in the classroom and know they're going to be supported. And so one of the things I guess I would add is the importance of the coaching model not being focused on underperformance. If you've got an underperforming teacher, coaches certainly can help, but coaches can't be characterized in a way to be perceived as supporting underperforming teachers only, because your strong teachers won't seek them out. And so we really have focused their efforts on supporting all of our classroom teachers. And I think that's been a big part of the success. So we fund them locally. It's a decision that we've made locally to have coaching be a priority. And we're fortunate enough to have been able to grow that team over time. And so, my only caution, and I know you all hear this all the time, is I do think instructional coaching is incredibly beneficial for teachers and then ultimately for students. But not every division is necessarily going to have the resources to be able to put into building an instructional coaching team. So if there were to be some type of requirement, then obviously there would need to be some support financially to make sure that school divisions that aren't in the position to be able to do it locally have the opportunity to do so. I hope that helps.
Yes, thank you.
Board members, other questions? Dr. Robertson.
Mine is not so much a question as it is acknowledgement, again, of a fantastic group of educational leaders across the Commonwealth. It's great to see so many good friends too here presenting from their areas of expertise so effectively. I recognize that a next topic in our retreat is to have a board discussion on the vision, goals, and next steps for teacher evaluation and professional development. Just while the panel is here, I wanted to acknowledge, I'm sure it's choreographed this way for us to use as a springboard this piece that Lori and her organization have produced, What Matters in Professional Learning. That really does provide us a wonderful springboard, I think, into crafting a vision for professional learning as part of our retreat discussion. Again, I just wanted to slip that in while the panel is still here, so that they see that someone has read it and that it's indeed perceived to be very, very useful to us. Thank you.
Thank you. So I don't see any other, Mr. Swan, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, panelists. I don't know if this is a question for Dr. Lane or the panelists, but how can this particular school year be maximized for professional development, seeing that teachers have had to develop professionally in so many different areas since last March?
Dr. Lane, you want to? Oh, go ahead, Dr. McCullough.
I'll start just very briefly, because I'm sure others can have more to contribute, but I have an initial thought, which is to just go back again to that idea of transfer. I think if my perception is correct, that teachers and school leaders have been drinking out of a fire hose this whole year and have had lots and lots and lots of learning opportunities, some of which have just come fast and furious and urgently. And so I think the best thing we can do right now is to have maybe some space to think about which of those things are going to serve us well in the long run, and how do we support ongoing implementation, maybe when it's not as urgent, but it's still really important.
Anyone else?
Dr. Wilson, I don't know if Mr. Swan was asking me that question, but I can certainly respond to it if you'd like.
Please.
Okay. And Mr. Swan, maybe offline we can talk about a clarification on what you mean by maximized. But I think the question is partly asking how can we get the most out of professional development with the system that we have now. And I think that's in a lot of ways a good segue to the board's next discussion on where we want to head in the future. But in the meantime, I think that what I believe is what we've heard from this panel, and that is that in any professional setting, the professionals, the teachers often know what they need to develop on the most. And I think a strong conversation with principals or whoever's guiding professional development in the county, if that's the case, on what the needs are is a great place to start. And using that assessment of the teacher's needs to help them find trainings, develop trainings, seek micro-credentials, it is the way to go. And if the question is about how can we maximize what they've learned in the past to meet the requirements that are currently in place, I think there's no doubt that teachers have done an incredible amount of self-professional development along with trainings that have been provided. And I think that a lot of what's been done can count under the current system. It's just a matter of, again, those conversations between the administration and the teachers in those communities to make sure that they're crediting teachers with what they've done.
Thank you, Dr. Lane. So I want to kind of head us toward on this glide path, perhaps to landing this panel or the end of the conversation by seeking some advice from you. So as a board, we are, as Dr. Robertson mentioned, we're going to be talking about next steps. So if you were to give us some advice, what would you offer about our doing a better job of linking professional teacher evaluation and professional development? What should we be thinking about as we go about that work? And how can we better coordinate professional development or professional learning opportunities to support both educators as they work to improve student achievement? Dr. Dare.
Thanks so much, Dr. Wilson. My answer, though, is not so related to professional development, but I just feel it's so critically important to share that, Virginia is doing incredible work in terms of changing expectations for our educators and is moving well ahead of our educator preparation programs. And whether it's through ABTEL, through additional requirements, things can move slowly in academia. And it could be years before we're even catching up to preparing educators to meet the expectations that are moving forward fairly quickly now. And so, my only recommendation is that the board gives consideration to how we can ramp up expectations within our EPPs in terms of how we're preparing educators for success and impact with all school children.
Thank you for that. Anyone else? Advice? How should we connect? Ms. Bright, I think I see you about to chime in.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Wilson. So someone mentioned earlier the fact that principals are overwhelmed. Principals and assistant principals are usually the ones who do the evaluation, the observations in the evaluation process. And, I've always wondered, you can have the best evaluation system in the world on paper, but if the time is not there to implement it with fidelity, it's not really effective. And so I guess I would ask that you consider looking at the structure as far as who's doing the observing, who's doing the evaluating. I think it's overwhelming for principals, and that it's almost impossible for them to do it with fidelity. And they're pulled in so many different directions and so many responsibilities. I know that in some states they use a peer assistance and review process. Someone I think also mentioned having other folks in the school or the division do some of the observing. And I think that also leads to the question about coaching. I think that whoever's doing the observations and the evaluation, there needs to be a relationship and there needs to be trust on both sides so that those conversations can be held and reflection can take place and coaching can take place. And then professional learning needs can be identified through that whole process. But in evaluation systems in the past, it's really been hard to make that happen because of the time that it involves. And then if I could, I'd like to add one more concern, and I think this came up in a meeting before about the new performance standard. My understanding is it goes into effect this fall for teachers, but there will not be a similar standard in effect for principals and superintendents. And I guess my concern that I want to bring to your attention is how much credibility do the administrators have if they're not being held to a similar standard, and yet they are going to be evaluating teachers on that standard. And then also, not all teachers are going to have the training by the fall of this year when the standard is implemented. So I guess my other ask is that there would be some consideration about no punitive measures during this coming year and having it be more of sort of monitoring how that performance standard is put into effect and giving feedback and learning from that during the first year of implementation. So those are just a couple things that come to mind when we're thinking about professional learning and how it's linked to the evaluation process. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Others? Dr. McCullough?
I would just agree, but I would add one more thing, and that is my advice would be to align professional learning with the teacher evaluation framework, but not to allow the teacher evaluation framework to limit it. I just want to go back to what Steve Geyer so wisely said at the beginning of this conversation when he talked about professional learning being personalized. And I remember in my experience as a principal that there were a lot of teachers in my building who, for whom thankfully I could check all those boxes on the evaluation, and they had evidence to support those competencies. Professional learning is no less important for those people. So we need a range of professional learning experiences that can be differentiated for first year teachers, for people who are moving towards the evaluation standards, and for people who are ready to move beyond the evaluation standards or deepen them, so that we don't establish a professional learning floor, and we really are encouraging and providing ways for people to stretch themselves as far as they can.
Thank you.
And I'll just add my agreement as well. The amount of professional learning that is required to have a really strong evaluation system in terms of our evaluators takes some time, intensity, calibration, clarity, and we're going to be rushing to do that well. And it's really going to be a bit of a process to make sure that our principals and assistant principals feel confident with the new standard.
Thank you. Anyone else? Have one more question. We have about 5 or 10 more minutes. I want to move to the last couple of questions here. Are there any specific requirements that should be placed on professional learning? The secretary, for example, noted this idea of either front loading, or maybe someone here on the panel talked about back loading professional development, doing it all up front in the window, or waiting until the very end. That's just an example. But should there be, what are some specific requirements that might be placed on a professional learning framework, if you will, that would help alleviate or satisfy some of those concerns, and really double down on this idea of continuous learning, right? And continuous improvement of teachers all along the way. Any ideas about that? No? Well, I'll let that marinate for a minute. I'll let that marinate. But in the meantime, Dr. Mann, I think you've had your hand up. I apologize. I didn't see you.
Don't you worry, as that's marinating. I really did have just one quick question. And it was about hearing maybe from the division leaders. Again, thank you all for your feedback and terrific ideas. Just on to what extent are the plans or the evaluations from the prior year used as a part of helping to guide where individuals need to be? And that's getting to the floor question. This is not about, PD being about you're not doing well. It is about, so I'm just really curious if that could be, if someone could speak to that, just to appreciate where that input is, because you also elegantly articulated there's a lot coming at educators, regulatorily speaking, and it's constant. It's not, there's never a quiet time when there's not something new that we're coming to learn and understand. And we want to figure out a way to make sure everybody knows about it. But when you think about a system, a state system of educators, so I'm curious, can someone just help me understand, where does that fit in determining how you tier support that you provide, use coach? And I'm just curious about that. So I didn't hear that really unpacked.
Dr. Wilson, I'm happy to
Please, go ahead.
At least start a response. I don't know that I can be super comprehensive, but I will say listening to the question really makes me think about the importance of school level leadership and the importance of stability within school level leadership. I've always been, maybe it's because I did it for 11 years, but I've always been a believer, not everybody will agree with this, that really the most challenging leadership role in school division organizations is the principalship, and everything that comes our principal's way on a day-to-day basis, on a year-to-year basis. And so I think part of the question relates to, in the same way that we think about students growing over time from year to year, and not just thinking only about learning within a given school year, but learning across years. That's really the same approach that we should use as much as possible with our professionals. And so how do we goal set for the long term? How do we provide scaffolded support like you described on a year-to-year basis? And in order to do that, it really does take stable leadership at the school level and at the division level to know your team members and to know what their needs are. And when you've got any kind of frequent turnover with leadership, I think that gets lost along the way. And so that doesn't mean it's not still possible. I think it just becomes much more challenging when there isn't stability within leadership. So that's really the only thing I wanted to contribute to responding to the question, is just to identify how critical that the leadership role is at the school level, and then again, the stability of it, so that there is a long-term plan that can be adhered to over time with teachers. And if you've got turnover on a regular basis, you're really leaving it more so in the hands of folks kind of having to relearn their team on an annual basis or every couple of years or whatever the turnover might be. So I do think it speaks to the importance of stability within leadership.
And I'll add that I think I can't emphasize enough how important it is for our school administrators to really be strong in their observation and feedback skills, because in Virginia Beach, our teachers select and identify a formative focus. That shouldn't just be some random thing that they're thinking about. It should be something that has been part of conversations either with coaches or with administrators, and with the idea that as administrators do observations or just even a quick walk through their classroom, they're able to say, hey, I noticed that, this had changed from the last time, or, some kind of reinforcement of that, because there is a lot. And I hear our best administrators talk about how they are helping teachers identify the one or two things that they really need to work on, and not the laundry list, like the huge 20-item checklist with 20 things checked. And so I don't know if that's really getting at what you're asking, but that's really the importance of continuously working with our school leaders, especially to help them be able to do that well, because that's really, the learning occurs through feedback. And so the types of feedback that they get from their administrators are really so important.
Thank you both for that.
So that brings us just about to the end of our time. And I think we got to just about every question that we had shared with you all, besides anything specific to, say, first-year teachers. But perhaps this question that Dr. Mann asked about, ongoing, how we unpack the needs of teachers over time, maybe that gets to some of that question. So I think I'm going to probably pause here and thank the panel again for being with us, for providing insights and sharing with us your expertise and your experiences in schools, divisions, and at the level of higher education. We know that we have work to do, and we appreciate you all giving us other things to think about. And certainly we will be certain to circle back to you for further insight or information, or helping us understand a little bit more deeply. So we really appreciate your time. With that, Ms. Davis-Vaught, I see your hand.
Dr. Wilson, I just wanted to thank Dr. Mann for asking that question. Dr. McCullough gave us a really nice explanation for a successful professional development and with the paperwork. So that might be something that we all take a second look at now that we've heard the presentation, and might be just a little bit more meaningful.
Thank you for bringing that to our attention. The document's called What Matters in Professional Learning, and is found on our the board website for those in the public who may be listening and would also like to have a look. So with that, panel, thank you all again for being with us. Appreciate seeing all of you. Dr. Gecker, or sorry, President Gecker, I've given you a doctorate. President Gecker, I'm going to turn the floor over to you. Thank you.
Thanks. I've always wanted an honorary doctorate, so I appreciate that a lot. And to the panel, thank you so much. It's good to see some old friends. Dean Dare, are you still here? Yes, there you are. Good to see you, and thank you for participating. And Dean Wallace, we miss you, and thank you again. Thanks to all of you for really providing us a lot to think about as we move forward. You are welcome to hang on this call if you would like, or if you have another life, which some of you do, you are also welcome to drop off at this point. But I think, the work of the board from here, just to give you an idea of where we're headed, I expect this to be a multi-year process for us. This is not, we're going to slap something together and say we've done something. I think we've got a lot of work to do. Our work will center around, and this will begin the discussion of, next steps. You know, we just made some changes to the evaluation system, but there were a lot of comments about maybe we ought to be moving to an evaluation system that is more supportive as opposed to potentially more punitive. So there'll be a lot of discussion about what's an appropriate evaluation system, how we systematize that and make it uniform throughout the Commonwealth. And then again, we got some insight today, but I think we will still do more work as to what professional development actually looks like and what we want it to look like. You know, as we move forward, how do we assure quality and how do we assure that the PD is going toward the specific needs of individual teachers? You know, we're now in an age with, you know, where we can deliver individualized content, or at least get much closer to delivering individualized content. I think that's it for comments from me. So I'm going to open this to the board. And Dr. Wilson, thank you for taking over. The coup was successful. I think you've gained a following. And we look forward to your future work in that role. Let's talk, though, for a minute about where we're going and, you know, begin to lay out a path for how we get to the goals that I think we want. Anybody have any initial comments or thoughts on that? And this includes, by the way, Dr. Lane, of course, Assistant Superintendent Coy, Assistant Superintendent Bowling, you know, basically anybody who has got some thoughts on this, we'd be, you know, welcome to hear. How do we move from here to, you know, action, or at least to lay out a more refined program so that we can then convert that program into action steps and begin to implement on the ground. Dr. Mann, I see you thinking about this seriously, so I'm happy to give you first crack at it. or maybe not.
I am thinking, I will grant you that. We just heard so much, and honestly, it's a lot to process, because on the one hand, professional development is absolutely essential to support educators in their craft of being able to be successful in supporting learning. And yet the forces at play that impinge upon bandwidth and how to think about all of the things they must know and do is a lot to sort of contemplate. Naturally, we want professional development to be focused around continuous learning, yet there is a performance evaluation system that has to also help us guard against people who shouldn't be teaching, and it's complex. And so, wow, we've got a lot to kind of wrap our minds around, to think about how do we bring some sanity. And I do feel like, for me, as someone who has not been trained in education from a professional discipline perspective, I have to continue to wrap my mind around, okay, these are state employees and the system must be able to address their public employees. Very different from how you might think about evaluation in a context separate from accountability and public. And so I just, that's a lot to kind of just put out there, but I'm thinking about all of that, because in what other system would one person be responsible for evaluating all the teachers in a school? I mean, in my mind, I was thinking about where are the parallels where that's what we're expecting to happen, but how can that be done given everything else a principal has to? So it's a lot to think about. I'm sorry, I can't be more.
Yeah, that was good, because you're right, it's a lot to think about. And you know, one of the lessons I think of this morning's presentations was that, you know, in any large system, in any large complicated system, if you expect to be able to move people in the direction you want, you need to have, you know, sort of both brevity and clarity, right? You need to be able to state with some certainty what the goals are, so that, if you will, individual decisions made by people on the, you know, on the front line have an understanding of what the ultimate goal is, so that, because you can't tell everybody all the time what to do. You need to have them understand what the goal is. And, hopefully, one of the aspects of an evaluation system that we might come up with as we move forward, and I'm hoping Dr. Lane pipes in here at some point on where we're headed there, is that it won't be so complicated that our goals aren't clear. That is that, what we evaluate people on fairly simply states what we want to be happening in the classroom. And I'm not sure how you get there exactly, but I'm sure James does. But it does seem that sort of part one of this work is, what do we want evaluations to look like? What do we want to accomplish with them? And how do we begin to implement a system that, in a non-punitive fashion, identifies weaknesses so that we can then plug in appropriate professional development to assist with those weaknesses. And again, I view this as part and parcel of the work we did on the SOQs, in particular surrounding young teachers and, teachers who are getting up, in experience, with the appropriate supports to keep their journey meaningful, and therefore to have what's imparted to our kids meaningful. And I know it's easy to say in that form, and now the question is, how do we begin to translate that from the ideal to the, here's where we're going to go. And I know, James, you've had a lot of discussion. We've had a lot of discussions over the last year about evaluations and what they ought to do. Do you mind speaking a little bit, or are you also, if we were at a real retreat, this would be the time when we would all get up, we'd grab the Danish, we'd have the third cup of coffee, and, you stretch your legs a little bit. Unfortunately, we're still looking at the same screens. And so minds might not be quite as fresh as we would like them to be. But if your mind is not too muddled, James, perhaps you'd like to give a few words of wisdom here.
Sure. And I think that it's important for the board to remember it's not one process. There are many things that you're going to have to do to reform this in the way that you want to. And I agree with Mr. Gecker that this isn't about slapping something together, but there are interim steps that are going to lead to the bigger steps, right? And that's partly why we thought through this 3-phase process that we had enacted before. But you're essentially, in our minds at the department, transitioning into the third phase of professional development, and kind of entering into the third phase of teacher evaluation, entering into the first phases of professional development. And so, I think that one of the things that we would like to see the board do is take some time over the next few months and really dig in on teacher evaluation and know exactly what you want to be in that and what you want to get out of it. And I think that we kind of heard loud and clear from the board that the current system is not where you want to end up at the end of this. And that's why we were so strong on it being interim. And the notion that we heard over and over again from the panel about evaluation not being punitive, but really being this opportunity for growth is important. So I think that's one of the first steps. I think in the meantime, there are some, and I think Melinda alluded to this well, there's other work that's happening that we're going to bring to you, like the second phase of the principal and superintendent evaluation. But as we move forward to the third phase, I think we need to bring those in alignment together. And then I think there will be interim professional development steps, where I think we need to take the professional development system that we have now and align it to what you did in the interim step. And then once you've developed the teacher evaluation, go to the more permanent professional development solution as well. And Abtel is working on that. And you'll hear about that in coming months around how we might take that from interim step. But what I heard today is we need to reopen the regulations around our EPPs and be thinking about what we want to put in there. I heard today that we need to open our licensure manual, which is partly this project with Abtel, but to make sure that we're not so focused on that they're getting professional development, but how and what professional development they're getting. I think that, of course, we're going to open the teacher evaluation piece. I think that there will be impacts on licensure regulations. And what I sat here thinking, and Mr. Gecker, we've never talked about this, so I apologize if this is a way big tangent. It got me thinking about whether it, at some point there's a cross section to the SOQs, whether there are actual positions that need to be mandatory. We talked about a teacher mentoring model and the funding for it, but we didn't necessarily mandate that there are certain positions. And then, do we have enough assistant principals to do all of this work? And so that's a big chunk to bite, but there's a lot of layers to the system we'll need to peel back. So for me, I really think the big one, and I'll go back to what I said at the beginning and wrap up with this, I think that we move forward from here, really laying out a vision for teacher evaluation. And I think everything will spur off of that, because I think that's going to be at the heart of what moves us forward. But I really appreciated Lori's comment around not making it a floor, but making it a continuum of how we support our teachers through their evaluation, and making growth and goal setting and all of that a much more forward component of that guidance.
Thank you. Ms. Holton?
So I thought all the presentations were really helpful. It's great to hear what some, as usual, we've got communities that are out there doing really ahead of the curve stuff we can all learn from. I had two sort of process thoughts on how we go forward. And one is, yes, ABTEL can play a huge role in helping us on the professional development piece, but I think that we ought to make it clear also that we look to them, that we focus initially, as Dr. Lane says, on this phase 3 of teacher evaluation rewrite. And meanwhile, that we ask ABTEL not to wait for us to be done with that, but to follow along with us and be working on recommendations for professional development, the teacher preparation program regulations, and potentially the licensing to the extent necessary. That if we kind of asked ABTEL to work on those pieces while we're working on the teacher evaluation, then when we're ready to get to the teacher, to those pieces, it's not going to be, another 3 years before we get somewhere on the ed prep programs, for instance. I think Dr. Dare's point was very good, very important that we not, if we do things too sequentially, rather than concurrently, then it'll be decades before we get where we want to be. So our discussion around evaluation can help inform those others if we almost look to ABTEL as our advisory group on some big chunks of this, and can be doing homework that will then help facilitate our work when we get there. With that thought in mind, I wonder whether, whether it would be helpful for us to have a joint meeting with ABTEL or some kind of conversation, because they work on such a separate track. If there's a way to get them and us, make sure we're all really aligned on what the work plan is anyway over the next year or so, it might be really, really helpful. So that was my one line of thought. And my other line of thinking is, I want to make sure we don't lose the benefit of the work that was done over the last couple of years, not just on the portrait of a graduate, but a portrait of a Virginia educator, portrait of a Virginia classroom, which Dr. McCullough referenced, and the portrait of a Virginia education leader, because, those were, the outcome of that work was really succinct documents on each of those that captured a lot of, President Gecker talked about, not overcomplicating this, and each of those is just a one pager on what do we think are the really key roles for educators, et cetera. And I don't actually remember the status of where that, I know it was presented to us. I don't remember whether I think we formally adopted each of those. Obviously we adopted the portrait of a graduate, but to go back and pull those up, and there were, what are the next steps on tying those into this work? And are those useful guides that we should be revisiting in some fashion? Those were my two process thoughts.
Dr. Wilson.
Thank you. I'll echo Ann's suggestion about collaborating or meeting with Abtel, I do think that would be really, really helpful to hear what they're thinking directly, and have some sort of conversation. The other thing that I am just mulling over is for me, a caution or a thought about backing into professional development from evaluation, right? I know that our process is what our process, we are where we are, but I am, just thinking about, is there some caution that we should have in allowing or being in a position for the teacher evaluation to actually define what we want out of professional development. And so I think for me, I will have a lens or an ear, a filter toward that, because I think there is value in also thinking about student outcomes first. What do we need to ensure this outcome, which would then lead me to professional learning, and then to what degree are teachers implementing what they learn to affect student outcomes, which is the evaluation part. So I'm thinking through all of that process as well.
I don't expect us to come up with a clear path today. We're just sort of hashing this out. And
Understand.
We'll come back with some recommendation. Anybody else have any comments on this? I know we've been sitting here for a while. Mr. Swan.
I'll just say, to piggyback off of what Dr. Wilson just said, it is true that if you do not hold us as teachers accountable, it's like a checkoff list. Like, okay, we just went to that professional development. How many points did I get for that? Okay, let me log that. So I think that it is important that we do come up with a plan to follow through with the professional development to keep and hold teachers accountable in the evaluation process.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
Mr. President?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm still digesting all the information here, but from a boots on the ground perspective, Dr. Geyer mentioned that it's all about discourse, discussing, making sure that we're all on the same page. So I think moving forward, as long as we communicate clearly and give ourselves time to digest this and help our teachers digest this information, that we're on the right track. I think everything that we're doing is purposeful. It's wonderful. It's great. And it's important for professional development to take our time, but yet also put a schedule down, make it consistent, make it relevant to what the teachers are doing. And I think we'll be right where we want us to be as a state.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have any comments on this? I don't, Dr. Robertson.
And Ms. Davis-Vaught and I both mentioned the piece that VASCD produced, and it may be useful as part of our conversation over the next several months to see how prevailing state documents align with or correlate with the themes that exist within that white paper. I think it is a good piece for us all to focus on when we have the time to do so. And I'd be curious to know how the alignment takes place, but that's a conversation for much, much later. Thank you.
Okay. I don't want to cut anybody off who's got something they want to say. I think in terms of next steps, Dr. Wilson, Dr. Lane, Emily, Ms. Webb and I will at least try to get our heads around a path forward in terms of what gets presented to the board and begin to chart out a path, much like we did last time. And if that's okay with everybody, at least as a way to leave this particular session, I think that'll be the marching orders as we go forward. I'd like to thank everybody for spending the day. I know it's been a long day, but I think it's been, pretty productive. In particular, I'd like to thank, VDOE staff who did, incredible amount of work putting this together, not just, the retreat piece of this, but to juggle everything that's gone on and will go on tomorrow is a lot of work. We won't have the same kind of opportunity to thank you all tomorrow that we have now. So, we truly appreciate everything, that you're doing to help move this agenda forward. It could not be done without you. So thank you so much. There is an old Talmudic expression, from my past, which is, Jewish people have this concept of, they call it tikkun olam, healing the world. And the idea is that, every time we're here, and some of you have heard me talk about this before, every individual has an opportunity and has actually the obligation to, try to make their piece of the world a little bit better. The thought is that if, good and evil are balanced, your individual actions may be the ones that tip the scale. There's a saying from the Talmud, which is, you're not obligated to complete the task, but neither are you free to desist from it. As we move forward, whether on the board, off the board, no matter where life takes us, I would remind you that, we are not free to desist from it. This is our work. And, thankfully, we've willingly undertaken it. And I have great hope that we will not necessarily complete it, but make great progress for the benefit of society and in particular for our kids. So thank you all very much. I think that's it for the day. And we will see you tomorrow, promptly at 10 a.m. Have a good evening.
Thank you.